Hey everyone, welcome back to Portal of Wisdom. We are back today with another story for you. So if you are new to the channel, like and subscribe and click that little post notification bell so you get alerted when we post new videos. And now on to today's topic. Today we're going to talk about another lost treasure or lost mine in the area of southern Arizona. And this one comes out of the January 1941 issue of Desert Magazine. So, we're talking 80 plus years ago that this story was told. I like getting to the root of some of these stories, or at least closer, because a lot of times through many years of telling stories, some details are changed, or, some things are altered a little bit through multiple retellings of stories. So it's nice to get into more details of a story the way that it was told, nearly 100 years ago. And this story goes way back, way further than that. This is going to be a story that kind of came about because of the Spanish conquistadors. And the story we're talking about today is the Lost Guadalupe mine, or it's also called the Virgin Guadalupe mine. So, like I said, this will be in the southern Arizona area, or what is today southern Arizona. Obviously, Arizona wasn't even conceived at the point that this story takes place. So, really, when it comes down to it, a lot of people forget that the Spanish were here in the western part of what is the United States today, and they were here well before the westward expansion of people from the East Coast. The British colonies started to gradually move west. The Spanish were in the West way before any of that ever happened, before people started coming over the Appalachians and expanding into areas that would become the, Midwest and other areas like that. So anyhow, obviously in the 1500s, the Spanish came to what is present-day Mexico. They conquered the Aztecs, and all of that stuff is history a lot of times that people really forget about. And so, with that being said, we're talking. The Spanish were here 300 or more years before that westward expansion of people came from the eastern U.S. And also, many people don't realize that in some cases, the Native Americans were actually mining some precious metals in some of these places even before the Spanish got here. So, of course, these tended to be places where there were very rich deposits of gold or silver, and it was, fairly obvious, fairly easy to get to. And I don't believe the Native Americans mined, a lot of gold and silver, but they did use it in some of their jewelry and things like that. So they were mining it in certain areas, but not to the degree that as the white men came later and would mine very small quantities of it. If it was a rich deposit, the Native Americans may mine it for their own uses. And obviously, those very rich deposits meant, very I guess a lot of money for the Spanish crown. And so the Spanish, obviously, in 1540, the Spanish conquistadors and that Coronado uh, expedition happened and came up into what would become the southwestern United States. And so basically starting in 1540, the Spanish were heading north out of the Mexico City area where they had conquered the Aztecs, and they were looking for the seven cities of Cibola, or the seven cities of gold. They believed that, according to, I believe, these Aztec legends and some of the things that they had heard, that there was this almost mythical land of gold that was somewhere north of where the Aztec capital was, which was in the Mexico City area, was close to the Aztec capital. And so they had these stories of these cities of gold, these 7 cities of gold that existed, further north or northwest, which would be somewhere in the southwestern part of North America. So the Spanish sent out these expeditions to find these, and Coronado's expedition in 1540 was one of the early ones. And Coronado made his way into the Santa Cruz River Valley to look for the cities that the Aztecs had talked about. And obviously Coronado, I'm sure, believed that if he could find these 7 cities of gold, that he would become very rich, and the Spanish crown would become very rich, and he would be rewarded and maybe be rich for the rest of his life. So anyhow, this is what they were doing. And so the Santa Cruz River Valley is basically south of Tucson. Well, I believe the Santa Cruz River, and of course these days it's mostly a dry riverbed, and that's the case with a lot of these rivers in the in the Southwest. It depends on the seasons, and during the rainy seasons they may run like normal rivers, and for the majority of the year they may be dry or may be dried up to more of a trickle, or just a little bit of water going through the area. So anyhow, but that also made for these areas to be good places for the Native Americans to settle. If part of the year you had running water and river coming through, and maybe it's dried up sometimes, or was down to just a bit of a trickle, there at least there was still water, which could be very scarce in the desert. So the Spanish had been told by the Aztecs that the area that they could find these 7 cities of gold was going to be in the pueblos of Spanish Nuevo Mexico. So we're talking, this area was supposed to be somewhere around current day New Mexico or Arizona of the southwestern U.S. Now this was all just the Spanish owned territory at this point, but anyhow, this is where they were directed to go after they conquered the Aztecs. And obviously the Aztecs had a lot of gold, so the Spanish believed in what they were being told about these areas, and they would find these rich areas. They just had to go through the Mexican deserts to the north and make their way into these areas. And when they got to the Santa Cruz River Valley, they encountered a Native American settlement or village that was called Tumacacori, or on the Spanish maps, I believe it was labeled as Tamatcor. So that was how it appeared on a lot of the Spanish maps, but we've come to know it as Tumacacori today, and this is still in southern Arizona. And the Spaniards discovered that the natives were in possession of a very rich gold mine near this native village, and they had been mining it already for a few decades. So obviously, I believe that the details say it had been mined since about 1508 or so. So the Spanish were coming through in 1540. So the Native Americans have already been mining this rich gold for a while, and making probably some pretty cool jewelry and stuff like that. So the Spanish see this, they notice what's going on, and it's said that the Spanish took possession of this mine. So of course it's very likely by force, as the Spanish had arms and I believe the Native Americans did not at this point. So The Spanish took over this mine. They took possession of this mine, likely by force, and they started to mine the gold at this location. Now, there is confusion on the location of this mine because I guess this happened due to the fact that there were two different missions that were erected by the Spanish. So obviously, if the Spanish have a rich gold mine in the southwest, what they did a lot of times was built a Spanish mission, not too far away. And the first Spanish mission of Tumacacori, or the upper mission, was said to be around 25 miles northwest of the current ruins of Tumacacori, or the lower ruins, which were built later and nearer the river. So the upper mission was said to be on the southern slopes of the Sarita Mountains, and it was said that probably the vast majority of people that may have looked for this mine had no idea that there had been two separate missions, and later tellings of this story may not have made this very clear that, obviously there's ruins, Spanish, ruins of the Tumacacori mission, but a lot of people, I believe, didn't realize that the one that is there now is the second or the later mission. So you're probably wondering how so many details can exist on such an old mine, because we're talking in the 1500s. Well, the Spanish expeditions into this area were well documented, with many maps that were drawn and other details that were abundant to them at this time. Those maps and details made their way to the Spanish church records in Spain. And one man was said to have seen these details and maps a little bit later, and he copied all of them for himself. Now, we could say that, how do we know that this is true or that this really happened? Because we don't know this man's particular name. But we may not need to know a ton of details about the man, as those who knew the man said that he spent $25,000. This is way back in those days. He spent $25,000 in 12 years looking for it. So you probably wouldn't spend that much time and money looking for something like that unless you knew that these maps and details were 100% legit. So the records stated that the Virgin Guadalupe mine was located 1 league from the big door on the mission to the southwest. Now, it wasn't clear to me if the mission was to the southwest of the mine, or if the mine was to the southwest of the mission. It was also stated that from the waters of the San Ramon, the mine was 1,800 veras to the north, and a vera was like a Spanish yard measurement. So it was said that 200 veras before reaching the mine, there was a black rock with a cross and the letters CCD-TD carved into the underside of the rock. So it sounds like this rock with the carvings was placed carvings face down, but maybe the rock being a dark rock, maybe it was identifiable from a little distance away, or didn't blend into the landscape super well. But anyhow, on the underside of this rock was said to be these carvings. 50 varas from the cross of Christ to the south were said to be slabs of silver weighing 25 to over 200 pounds each. Now, it's very likely these big silver slabs, if they had been around or in this area at some point, very well could have been picked up by someone if they were obvious. So they may or may not still be there. But this mine was apparently still producing at the point that the Spanish shut it down, but the Spanish closed it up in 1648, and it was believed this was because of Native American uprisings in the area. And so the Spanish apparently left the area until they came back later, and they built another Tumacacori mission. And this is the lower mission, and they built this in 1698. But before the Spanish left in 1648, they said that from the big slabs of silver and 200 varas to the southwest, they placed gunpowder in the cliffs and tore down two peaks. So it sounds like they did this right above the mine opening. So these peaks, or at least a lot of the rock from them, crumbled down to cover the mine. So it sounds like they probably packed a bunch of gunpowder in a lot of the cracks and stuff in the mountain up above the mine, and blew a lot of rock down over the top of the mine, probably sealing it off. And the document stated that the mine had been erased from the mountainside, and people could pass by and have no idea that a rich mine was there hidden. When the mine was operated, it was said that it produced 45 million pesos. So that's a lot of money, especially when you're considering this is in the 15 and early 1600s. The document said that it was over 2,000 mule loads of silver and more than 900 mule loads of gold that had pulled out of this mine before they closed it up. So obviously there were some pretty extensive workings and mining going on, and maybe it went deep into the mountain. And if the rock was ever to be moved away from, where things were caved off of the mountain, there probably would be some pretty extensive tunnel work in there, and maybe plenty of gold veins still there. It's also been discovered by a lot of people that have looked for this mine and various other mines, much later on, that there had been a considerable amount of mining that had been done by a lot of the Native Americans in these mountains. So it could be extremely difficult to find this mine again, being as there's a lot of remnants of a lot of other mining activity in these mountains. But that's also a good sign for the possibility of a mine that was producing a lot of money worth of gold and silver. But if the mine is still out there, it would be in the vicinity of the first Tumacacori mission on the, or the upper mission, which was built and destroyed between 1540 and 1648. So we know in 1648 they collapsed the rock over the mine. I don't know how big the first mission was, and if it was mostly of adobe construction. It could definitely have just kind of melted back into the desert through rains and winds and stuff like that. I don't know if there's anything much that can be found where the initial mission was, but since the Spanish caved off that the mountain and the mine tunnel, it's possible that it's still there. It's still hiding under few feet of rock, maybe. We don't know. It doesn't really give many details about how much gunpowder was used to cave off the mountain. It does, I guess, give kind of an impression that maybe it was a lot, because it said something about 2 mountain peaks being brought down. So I don't know if it changed the outline of the top of the peaks. If they brought a heck of a lot of rock down over top of these mines, expecting to maybe be able to come back to them much later. And of course, 50 years later, they came back and built a new mission, I believe, closer to the river, probably closer to water and agriculture, where they could grow things and stuff like that. But there aren't really any records that showed anything or that anyone had found saying that when they came back in 1698 they were trying to relocate the original mine. Now I would imagine, this is 50 years later, there probably would be some people that knew about it at that point. Maybe they weren't able to find it, and then pretty quick those people are no longer around, and a lot of these records might not be in Mexico. All of those records made their way to the king and to the church, and that's where the records were housed. So anyhow, that's where they were when the gentleman came to look for him. Obviously, if he spent $25,000 looking, he was probably a very wealthy gentleman looking to get extremely more wealthy, but he wasn't able to find it. But it's possible that the old Guadalupe mine is still out there somewhere, maybe buried between, or behind a few feet of rock. So that is the story of the lost Guadalupe mine in southern Arizona, somewhere close to the old Tumacacori mission. Thanks for listening.